Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today is dedicated for a speedy and complete refuah shema for our Rabbanit, Farhi Batzima Fega, for complete refuah shema for Rabbi Abadi Shlomo Tunei. Dedicated in loving memory of Nishmat Shelley's mother, Mago Bat Marie, sponsored by Shelley and Alberto Sanado. Sponsored anonymously, dedicated in loving memory of Lucy Gabay, Nishmat Nurit Bat Shafika. In loving memory of Abinu Morenu V'Ater Roshenu Yusuf Ahob Shalom Alav Shalom, Lilu Nishmat Yosef Shalom Ben Deborah Alav Shalom, and the Rebbe Milubavitch Alav Shalom Menachem Mendel Ben Chana from the Ohev Shalom family. Also dedicated loving memory Lilu Nishmat Nuria Sion Ben David Alevi. Condolences Alav Shalom, condolences from the Lavi family for his grandson Robert Lavi, and as well dedicated in honor of the marriage of Moria Bibi to Moshe Aluf. Mazal Tov to the parents, Rabbi Rabbanit Aluf, and Rabbi and Rebbetzin Bibi. Mazal Tov and Mabruk, Big Simcha in Atlantic Beach. Also dedicated for the speedy and complete refuah shema of David Ben Chava, sponsored anonymously by Emmanuel Zara. Also dedicated for the speed and completely refuah shema of Menorah Bat Parvane, and sponsored by Sarah and Shai Mahani. Dedicated in celebration of the wedding of Esther Edis and Eli Rishdi, Siman Tov, Mazal Tov, and Mabruk. And finally, the cold brew is sponsored in honor of you and your substantial capacity to good today and every day by David E. Ash. Finally, I'd like to say Mazal Tov and Mabruk to my daughter Charna and my son-in-law Yoshua Cohen on the birth of a baby boy this morning. Mazal Tov, congratulations, Mabruk, Bezat Hashem Yishbi Nichnas Laberit Bi'ito Bizmano, and Kishem Yikanes Laberit Ken Yikanes Torah Chuppah Ma'asim Tovim. We also want to shout out a very special attendee at the Breakfast in the Class, my son Yitzchak, who's here at the Breakfast in the Class. Okay, let's begin. The Pasuk tells us that in the story of Korach, the result was a miraculous end. Well, I mean, miraculous can be good and bad. People oftentimes think of miraculous and they think good. But something can be miraculously bad too. So there was a miraculously bad ending for the story of Korach. Moshe Rabbeinu says, you know how you'll know that I'm right? If the ground will open up its mouth. They don't die a regular death. The ground will open up its mouth and will swallow Korach and his adherents alive. Then you'll know that I did not do this, it's not from my heart, I didn't decide anything, it's all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And indeed what happens, the ground opens up its mouth, and Korach and everyone that's with him gets swallowed into this gaping hole into the depths underneath the earth. My friends, the Pasuk says an interesting language. It says, and all of the people that were surrounding, Nasu Likolam. They ran to their voice. Question is, ran to whose voice? All the Jews surrounding ran, Nasu Likolam, ran to whose voice? The Rabbeinu Bachya writes that what it means is that as all the people who were being swallowed by the earth were screaming as they were asking people to save them, or they were maybe saying Moshe emet v'torato emet, or maybe they were screaming teshuvah, but whatever it was, they were yelling, and the people were running away from the sound of these screaming of this yelling. However, the question is a very interesting question. What does it mean that they were saying Moshe emet Torah emet? The Rabbeinu Bachya writes that there's a Gemara that tells us about Hahu Taya. There was once a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Bar Hana, and he was walking, and there was a certain shepherd that was there in the desert region, and he told him, "Do you want me to show you where Korach and his people were swallowed?" And the rabbi said, "Of course." He takes him to a particular spot in the desert, and he showed him that there were two openings in the earth, and they were smoking. There was heat coming out of them. Openings, if you will, to Gehinnom, to hell. That's what the Gemara says. And he says, "What is this spot over here?" So the Taya, this shepherd, he took his spear, or whatever, his staff, and he took a piece of wool. He wet the piece of wool and he held it over the opening, and it was getting burned. And he says this is where Korach and his people were descended into Gehinnom, from this place. And then he asked the rabbi, and what do you hear? And the rabbi said, I hear the sound of voices saying, Moshe emet, v'torato emet. Moshe is true, and his Torah is true. V'anachnu, and we are badaim. We are people who are peddling in untruths. What a crazy idea that is. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, he says, but you should understand that is in a certain sense what happens in Gehinnom. That a person after this world, when the person goes to, if they're going, God forbid, to this other place, they are forced to admit on repeat all of the mistakes that they made in this earth. My friends, so the people of Korach was saying repeatedly, Moshe emet, v'torato emet. Moshe is true, and his Torah is true. And we, in suggesting that anything was untoward in those appointments, we were the ones that were saying something that was not true. It was not Moshe. My friends, I want to draw your attention to this line, to this concept that Rabbeinu Bachya is saying. That in Gehinnom, it's not just that Korach and his followers have to say, Moshe emet, v'torato emet. Moshe is true, and his Torah is true. But that everybody is forced, so to speak, to repeat their mistakes, to admit their mistakes eternally. I want to share something that I think is a very powerful idea. We've talked about this before. And I think that this idea has ramifications in this world and in the next. And this idea is that so much of Judaism, which is seen as punishment and as blessing, is less a consequence than an outcropping, is less a reality created. Is less a punishment than a reality created. You know, ultimately, the idea that a person can make a mistake and then forget about their mistake comes from the fact that as a human being, as time goes by, we forget things. In the moment, we might be incredibly embarrassed. Maybe you said something really stupid, or you realize that you were very insensitive or very selfish, and you're embarrassed, your cheeks go red, but after a little while, you forget about it, and you move on. And we are able to move on from the mistakes that we've made and the pain that we feel in that moment because we forget. There's a tremendous amount of research that's being done right now into dementia and into Alzheimer's. And one of the things that they are realizing is that many of these diseases are, in fact, a simple deterioration of the cellular structure that makes up the ability for people to recall. So these weaker cells, when you're getting older and getting weaker, your mind, your memory is also getting older and getting weaker. But that is a function of cellular health. And the idea is that if we could figure out a way to have these cells not deteriorate, not degenerate, then your memories would be as safe as your strength, so to speak, as a muscle in your arm. Fascinating research that's going on right now in that field. But my friends, I want to ask you a question. Imagine there was a scenario in which there was no cellular degeneration or deficiency. Our ability to remember something, how long would it last for? Potentially forever. My friends, that is what the soul experiences in Gan Eden, in heaven, but also in Gehinnom, in hell. See, the idea of heaven and hell in Judaism is not so much where God beats you up and punishes you to get you back, so to speak, some sort of eternal revenge from Hashem, but rather it's the eternal reality of the bed that we have made with our correct or incorrect choices. Imagine for a minute you did something to break up a relationship, someone that you really, really love, and you feel terrible about it. Now imagine you could not forget that. You would live in that space with that upset, with that pain, with the embarrassment of that for a very long time because you couldn't forget it. Imagine that. That's the idea of what Olam Ha'emet is. And I think in some way, that's why we call it Olam HaEmet. Because it is a world of truth. It's a world where we are not, so to speak, allowed to forget the truth of our actions. Not as a punishment, but because the soul doesn't degenerate or become deficient. So we live eternally with the choices that we have made. Korach and his cohorts live eternally with the line, Moshe Emet v'Torato Emet. What a wild idea that is to wrap our heads around. And Rabbeinu Bachya says that will be true for us too. We will eternally be saying over the mistakes that we've made for petty reasons, for silly reasons, etc., etc. I want to draw perhaps your attention to one beautiful idea, and then we'll kind of circle back to Nasu Kolam. During the World War II, some of the people who tried to escape from the concentration camps, made their way into the vast forests in Germany, in Poland, in Lithuania, in Russia, and they were trying to hide from the arm of the Nazis, of the SS, trying to track them down and send them to their deaths in the concentration camps. Some of them lived and hid in the forests. Some of them became partisans. But at the time, there was a group of people in the forest who were running for their lives because they heard a tremendous sound that sounded like the movement of troops. And they were running through the forest. And they came across a small group of people that were also in the forest, survivors. And they were sitting around the fire in the forest. And they were eating whatever they were eating there. They had their hands on, very relaxed. They ran up to them and they said, "What are you guys doing? Why are you so relaxed? Don't you hear? People are coming." And the people around the fire said to them, "It's true. We probably should be scared like you. But we're a group of people. All of us are actually deaf. And we were selected to be able to be killed because of our disability." The Nazis hated disability as well. It ran in the face of their idea of the Übermensch, the master race, the superior human that they thought that they would be able to create genetically, etc., etc. So we managed to escape together. And if we heard what you're hearing, we would be scared too, but we don't hear it. Rav Zilberstein writes an amazing thing. There are times when a person is hearing something that should make them run for their lives. But if they're incapable of hearing it, the noise can be as loud as you'd like. The volume could be up to the max, but the message doesn't penetrate. My friends, this deafness, if you will, on a physical level, is present in a person's emotional, spiritual life to the same degree. There are times when a person doesn't or can't or won't hear something. And even if that truth is facing them, and even if they know that making this choice is going to carry terrible ramifications down the line, they become incapable of hearing what you're trying to say to them. Think for a minute about a person who's suffering from some form of addiction. Their friends, their spouses, their families are telling them, "You're drinking too much, it's getting out of hand, you're no longer in control." The person, unfortunately, is taking some form of drugs. Maybe sometimes in the aftermath of a surgery, they got pills for the pain, and they kept getting more and more prescription. Then they start lying to the doctor. Then they lie that it still hurts. Then they lie to the doctor that they lost their prescription to get more. Then they lie to friends asking if they have extra ones. My friends, it's an epidemic what's going on in America today, this abuse of prescription drugs. It is a disaster. It's everywhere. So my friends, you go and tell this guy you have a problem. What does the guy say? "I don't have a problem. It's fine. I'm having pain. I just need to." You have a guy who's drinking too much. "I'm just taking the edge off." They can't hear what you're saying. My friends, that's the pasuk that we're reading over here. Sometimes if the person was listening, they would know that this is going to be a decision that they're going to regret for the rest of their life. That they're going to have to repeat again and again and again. Moshe emet v'torato emet. Eternally. I know I'm pushing my wife away, my husband away. I know. I don't know what to tell you, Rabbi. I know I should forgive them. I know I should be more welcoming. I just can't. We know the ramifications. You know the people will tell you, you keep pushing your son like that, he's not going to take it anymore. You keep putting this kind of pressure on your son-in-law, on your daughter-in-law, they're not going to come around your house anymore. And you hear it. And on some level, you know that the ramifications that they're describing are real, or they're in real terms. But there's a time when a person is deaf and they can no longer hear. Sometimes physically, yes, but many times spiritually, emotionally, mentally. One of the most important things that a person can have in this life is someone that they can outsource a decision to when they realize they are incapable of making a correct decision. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean by abdicating your responsibility, going and asking a rabbi to make a decision for you. You know my feelings on that. I don't mean going and asking your friend, your family, your parents to make a decision for you. But you know what? If you hear from one person, from two people, from three people, and they're telling you that your decision-making process is impaired, you're prejudiced against this family. There's nothing wrong with them. They can date you. They can date your kid. You're prejudiced, this kid, you don't like him because you remember what he was like as a kid. Or you didn't like his dad when we were growing up in school 25 years ago. You're taking it out on your kid. My friends, listen carefully. You hear that from one person, from two people, from three people. At a certain point, you have to realize, I am incapable of hearing something on this subject. So therefore, maybe it makes sense to actually outsource and say to someone, am I being stupid here? Am I not listening? Listen carefully. Says the Pasuk, and all the Jewish people, Nasu lekolam. They ran away from the voice of the people yelling as they fell into this hole. I think to myself, all this time, Moshe Rabbeinu, Aharon, all this time in the spies, Yehoshua, Kalev, all this time, Moshe talking to them, encouraging them, telling them not to complain, and they can't hear. You know whose voice they ran from? They listened to. They listened to the voice of the Jewish people screaming, we made a mistake. There's a famous line that goes, wise men will learn from others' mistakes, but a fool will only learn from his own. We have a choice in this life to be wise or to be foolish. We could be wise and watch the consequences play out on someone else's life and then not suffer that hurt and then not suffer those consequences or those ramifications. Or we could decide to say repeatedly, no, I'm different. I'm going to get it done even though everyone else is. I know better. I don't have this problem. I don't have this prejudice. I know. A fool sometimes only learns from his own mistakes. My friends, Korach and his people would not learn from anyone else's mistake. But at the very least, the people of Yisrael that were svivim, that were around, that were surrounding them, who saw what was going on, at least in that moment, the logic that they couldn't hear, the voice of Moshe that they couldn't hear, at least they heard the voice of Korach. I want to ask you a simple question. And that question is, pay attention to other people's problems, not to judge them. Open your heart to other people's problems, not to look down at them, by the way. And secondly, not only to help them, because you will do it for that reason. That is the mitzvah. But I want to share with you, when you open your heart to someone else's problems, you also learn and protect yourself from the same problems. If you feel proximity to pain, You learn its lessons even when it's not visited upon you. And that's what the Pasuk says. Chol Yisrael, and all the Jews that were svivotam, that were surrounding them, they were close enough. They could hear and feel the screaming that Korach and his people were making. And they decided in that minute, they ran away. My friends, you see families drowning in debt because they're spending money they don't have. You want to wait till that happens to you? Run away. You see families whose marriage is on the rocks because the way they speak to each other, because of the decisions that they make in their life. My friends, they spend too much time apart. You see a couple who, you know what, for business, for the best of reasons, not for any bad reasons. The husband was always away, always away. You watch somebody else, their marriage grew further and further and further apart as they spent more and more time apart. You watch it happen. Don't let it happen to you. Run away. Nasu lekolam, at the very least. If you didn't run from Moshe's voice and Yoshua's voice and the logic of Aaron and the logic of Kalev, you know what? At least run from the screaming. At least run from the pain. Watch what happens when a person has one too many drinks. Watch what happens when a person is not careful with gambling and it takes over their family. Watch what happens when a family talks incessantly about weight and about body image, and you watch their children develop all sorts of unhealthy eating habits, all sorts of eating disorders, and recognize that if you're obsessed as a family with weight gain and weight loss and how much we weigh and what we look like all the time, if that's such a focus, understand that that family's crying is going to come knocking. Run away. You have a choice to be a wise person and learn it when it's happening to someone else, or to be a fool and wait for it to knock at your door. May Hashem bless us that in this scenario we are wise enough to be able to run and to protect and to build our families, those that we love, and our communities with the right decisions. Baruch Adonai Le'olam.